U.S. President Donald Trump says he is in no rush to speak to Chinese President Xi Jinping as a trade war looms. And during a meeting with Israel's Prime Minister, Trump suggested the U.S. take control of the Gaza Strip. Taiwan's main opposition party is responding to a campaign to recall its lawmakers with recalls of its own. Plus, Palau looks to its ally Taiwan to boost its appeal for tourists. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Betty Chen. The U.S. Postal Service has suspended the delivery of all packages from China and Hong Kong, the latest in escalating trade tensions. As Chris Goring reports, with the country's leaders yet to engage in talks, consumers and investors are left uncertain about the future.
American consumers expecting packages from China may have to wait after the U.S. Postal Service announced a suspension on all parcels delivered from China and Hong Kong. The likely target? Chinese e-commerce giants like Shein and Temu, which have benefited from a duty-free shopping policy that has now been ended by Donald Trump. The White House is also reportedly considering adding the two companies to a list of firms engaged in forced labor. It's the latest move in an escalating trade war between China and the United States. The U.S. imposed a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports earlier this week and pulled back from imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico at the last minute. The White House says the tariffs come in response to China's economic practices and failure to curb illegal exports of the drug fentanyl. Beijing calls this an excuse.
美方以芬太尼问题为由，对中国的商品加征10%的关税，施压威胁，对中国行不通。中方敦促美方纠正错误的做法。
China has hit back, announcing tariffs of its own on U.S. machinery and energy imports. Beijing also plans to put export controls on minerals critical for electronics manufacturing, and is launching investigations into U.S. companies such as Google. Despite these economic measures, some experts say China has showed restraint.
One of the things that we did not see, though, is a broadside against all U.S. products. China was very selective. We interpret this as China's leaving room for negotiation and also doesn't want to overreact to a 10% tariff by the U.S.
And people in China say their government's actions are warranted.
如果因为我们中国也是个很大的国家，我们不能说让他随便的欺负，那他一直征收各种关税，那我们不能不发声音。
正常的现在的贸易战，比如说芯片限制啊，这种我觉得反倒是好事儿，我们会就是自主的会更好。
President Trump, meanwhile, seemed unconcerned about China's action, saying he's in no hurry to speak with Chinese President Xi Jinping.
Mr. President, what's your reaction to China's retaliatory tariffs?
It's fine. It's fine. We're going to do very well against China and against everybody else.
And you don't want to speak to President Xi?
No, we'll speak to him at the appropriate time. I'm in no rush. I'm in no rush.
Consumers in both countries may be wondering what it will take to reach a deal.
China can come to some form of agreement, but what the U.S. wants to see is sustained action, meaning not just a one-off. What China doesn't want to do is it doesn't want to be seen giving into the U.S. So it will also need to receive some reciprocal actions on the U.S. part, whether it's lessening of export controls, maybe access to some NVIDIA chips that are banned.
In the absence of any agreement, consumers and investors in both countries are left to determine whether the growing trade war is a temporary blip or a new normal. Fu Huahong and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
For more on what the impact of a new trade war between the U.S. and China might be, reporter Chris Goring spoke with Gary Ng of financial firm Natixis.
If the tariffs between the United States and China remain in place, what will be the impact on the two countries and on the global economy as a whole?
Well, definitely it is challenging to see two of the biggest economies in the world end up in a trade war. So from the US side, the 10% tariff on China can actually make it harder for the Fed to cut interest rate because of the potential inflationary pressure to the US economy. But of course, from the China retaliation side, it's really about the export control of China in some of the critical materials, which can be important for some of the sectors like military, semiconductors, electronics, and etc. In a single word, I think inflation is the ultimate outcome.
Well, what about Taiwan? I mean, China's export controls are mostly on minerals that are used in high-tech manufacturing, including chips. And of course, Taiwan makes more than 90% of the world's most advanced chips, many of which go to American companies. So could China use trade restrictions against Taiwan as a kind of proxy for its trade war with the United States?
Yes, I think this is definitely a very valid concern. And of course, if we look at the supply chain structure, we do see that Taiwan is quite good in manufacturing a certain part within the chain. So definitely, if we do see US-China trade tension continue to escalate, it's possible that there could be certain measures that would be applied to Taiwan, which may indirectly hurt the US. Then it is really about whether the world can diversify its supply of this sort of materials from other sources. And we do see that certain from Australia, from US and Malaysia, or increasingly there's also talk about Ukraine on basically how to supply this sort of material to the US and other countries. But we do need to see greater development towards that sense, because it's not that easy to replace someone who produced 80% of the production annually. It seems to me that it is a trend that is unavoidable, and Taiwan simply just needs to cope with that.
The recent US tariff threats against Mexico and Canada ended up being resolved fairly quickly, at least for now. Do you expect the same thing to happen with China?
Compared to the case of Canada and Mexico, the issues are definitely more complex between the US and China. But for the case of China, beyond the drug problem that basically Trump has emphasized, there are also other issues about this massive trade surplus, the tech competition, and where all the strategic interests of the US over the world. So even though there may be a temporary deal on a certain issue, it's possible that some issues may arise at a certain point in the future.
That was Gary Ng of the financial firm Natixis. U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. could take control of Gaza, possibly with the help of American troops. He made a comment in a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. Rosie Greninger has the story.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it.
Extraordinary comments from U.S. President Donald Trump, side by side with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Washington, D.C. Netanyahu is in the U.S. for bilateral talks, despite a warrant for his arrest from the International Criminal Court over war crimes in Gaza.
This is a testament to your friendship and support for the Jewish state and the Jewish people. I've said this before, I'll say it again. You are the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House.
During the leaders' pivotal talks, Trump walked back from the former administration's commitment to supporting a two-state solution in Gaza. The US leader instead proposing the permanent resettling of millions of displaced Palestinians elsewhere, calling the enclave a demolition site after nearly 16 months of war between Israel and Hamas.
I mean, there's hardly a building standing, and the ones that are going to collapse. You can't live in Gaza right now, and I think we need another location.
Trump saying the US would redevelop the war-torn region, with neighbouring countries taking in displaced Palestinians. That's despite Arab nations, including the US's regional allies Jordan and Egypt, already vehemently opposed to any forced relocation of Palestinians.
Most certainly there's no plan behind this. And if there is, it's not a plan that has any connection to reality in today's Middle East. And it's certainly not in consultation with the Palestinians or neighboring countries like Egypt and Jordan.
While Trump's remarks were immediately rejected by Saudi Arabia and Palestinian leaders.
Our homeland is our homeland. If part of it is destroyed, the Gaza Strip, the Palestinian people selected the choice to return to it. I think that we should be respecting the selections and the wishes of the Palestinian people.
It comes at a crucial time during the ceasefire arrangement between Israel and Hamas. Poised to soon enter its second phase, tens of Israeli hostages held by Hamas are expected to be released in return for hundreds of Palestinians detained in Israel. With Netanyahu in the US, protesters gathered in Tel Aviv, urging Trump to help secure the release of all the remaining hostages.
We call on President Trump to pressure Netanyahu to avoid thwarting the deal, avoid spoiling the deal that already started.
Israel is sending a delegation to Qatar to discuss the continued truce, as Netanyahu prepares to meet with members of the US military and Congress. But with Trump's new proposal for the future of Gaza drawing condemnation, the prospect of finding lasting peace is again uncertain. Dolphine Chen and Rosie Greninger for TaiwanPlus.
The U.S. Senate has confirmed President Donald Trump's Attorney General pick, Pam Bondi, as head of the Justice Department. The longtime Trump ally is expected to radically reshape the government body and the FBI. Trump has already targeted both institutions since he took office, with a series of high-level firings seen as revenge for criminal investigations into the president. Bondi was previously the Florida Attorney General and served on Trump's Opioid and Drug Abuse Commission during his first administration. Taiwan's recall war is heating up as the opposition Kuomintang launches its own petitions to remove rival legislators. The move comes after almost 24 KMT politicians were targeted in a recall campaign earlier this week. Reese Ayers reports.
Taking down the toads. The slogan marks the beginning of a retaliatory campaign by Taiwan's main opposition party, the Kuomintang, to recall rival legislators, with toad a derogatory term referring to the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, whose colour is green. Almost 24 recall petitions were filed against KMT lawmakers by several citizen groups earlier this week. But now the opposition, who hold more seats in the legislature, are fighting back. First by targeting 2 DPP politicians, both surnamed Wu.
在地方上其实根本都没有看到他来走跳这样子，然后还有一些民众其实经过看到，其实还就是充满疑问，说吴佩益是谁。
But Secretary General of the DPP Legislative Caucus, Roselia Wu, the other Wu targeted in the recall campaign, clapped back, arguing that whereas the campaign against the KMT is led by citizens, the opposition are using their campaign for political gain.
就罢免的串联这件事情，我们可以看到2个完全不同的方向。民团自动自发，这个是针对蓝营所提出来的罢免案。反观对于吴思瑶或吴佩益等绿委所提出来的，背后都是国民党的势力。
And despite the moves against their own members, at a press conference on Wednesday, the DPP said they support citizens' right to remove elected officials.
因为人民是国家的主人，罢免也是公民的权利，因此民进党其实是尊重公民直接行使民权。
Taiwan has experienced political turmoil since last year, when DPP candidate Lai Ching-te won the presidency but lost his party's control of the legislature to the combined forces of the KMT and the Taiwan People's Party, or TPP, resulting in a fractured and often deadlocked government. These recall campaigns are seen by some as attempts by both sides to wrest back power, and with the KMT promising to fight fire with fire, they're set to escalate.
民进党的开工日就是推动全面罢免，有这种政党选输了，1年后又要重选，只为他的政治来考量的时候，我们一定要勇敢地站出来，我们要以战止战。
Threatening mass recalls of legislators is just the latest battle occupying Taiwan's ruling powers. It's part of a larger ongoing political war between 2 parties, with fundamentally different views on how best to govern Taiwan. Kama Xu and Rhys Ayres for TaiwanPlus.
Weekly cases of people seeking treatment for flu in Taiwan hit a 10-year high in late January, with over 162,000 people visiting doctors. 132 deaths and more than 650 confirmed severe cases have been reported by Taiwan's Centers for Disease Control this flu season. The CDC says most of the severe cases are linked to the H1N1 strain, and many of them were unvaccinated. It's urging high-risk individuals to get vaccinated. The CDC expects the outbreak to subside in the next week or two. Taiwan has reportedly asked to buy 6 surveillance aircraft from the U.S. Local media say the military wants to buy Hawkeye early warning planes to replace the 2 older models it has now. Sources say the Hawkeyes would help counter the threat posed by Chinese fighter jets, which are flying more missions around Taiwan. The Defense Ministry hasn't commented on the reports. Coming up after the break, Taiwan's military looks to pump up its headcount by letting veterans to re-enlist.
We bring you stories from Taiwan.
Every day of the week.
Our reporters travel the nation.
Exploring the issues that matter to you.
News from here in Taiwan and around the world.
What's up, Taiwan? On TaiwanPlus.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, download the TaiwanPlus app.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. The military is changing rules about re-enlisting troops who've chosen to leave the armed forces. But as Jean Venturez reports, a recent budget freeze could hamstring these efforts to boost flagging recruitment.
Taiwan's military is short-staffed, and the country's rapidly aging population is only partly to blame. Last year, 1,500 service people accepted offers of payment in exchange for early discharge, part of a policy meant to address pension system sustainability, adapt to reforms, and manage personnel composition. These efforts have seen rates of early retirements quadruple in 4 years, and there are fewer young recruits willing and able to fill the gaps. Now, the Defense Ministry wants seasoned soldiers back. It's proposing scrapping a rule that made it hard to re-enlist soldiers who'd returned to civilian life. The idea is that anyone itching to get back into uniform can do so after a year.
在品德不放宽、体位不放宽、不影响国军的战力状况下，让因为个人选择离开部队的人可以在回营服务，对国家战力提升有所帮助。
But attracting veterans back will take money, both for pay and better conditions. And money is in short supply. Lawmakers have frozen billions of US dollars in military spending and cut equipment budgets by 3%. Defense analysts say the government will find a way forward, but that it needs to address better salaries for the plan to succeed.
的确，跟其他国家比较起来，台湾的 GDP 算是不错的，可是军人的待遇是比较偏低的。所以，如果可以提高他们的薪水的话，对于吸引这些人留在军中，或者是新的人加入军队是有帮助的。
While many militaries face recruiting challenges, Taiwan's struggle is especially critical given the direct threat from China and its low enlistment rates. Calculations put last year's troop numbers at just 78% of where they should be, and far below the 85% capacity needed for battlefield effectiveness. With more soldiers continuing to retire early, this gap could become a problem for Taiwan's national security. Patrick Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's military has stationed more than 100 Marines at Songshan Airport in the capital, according to local media. Reports say that troops from the 66th Marine Brigade are being deployed into Taipei, part of efforts to bolster defenses around the capital city in case of an attack by China. The 66th Brigade will also be elevated to a strategic reserve force and work with military police to defend Taipei and the surrounding area. At least 11 people have been killed in a mass shooting at an adult education center in Sweden.
Vi har idag sett ett brutalt dödligt våld mot helt oskyldiga människor. Det här är den värsta massskjutningen i svensk historia. Ännu saknas väldigt många svar. Och jag kan inte ge de svaren heller.
The suspected shooter is among the dead, and the police believe he acted alone. Authorities could not provide details about his identity or motive. School shootings in Sweden are rare, but the country has seen an increase in gun violence in recent years, with it recording one of the highest homicide rates in the EU. The lower house of the Philippines Congress has endorsed a petition to impeach the country's vice president, Sara Duterte. The 23 members of the Senate will now hold a trial that could see Duterte removed or disqualified from holding office. The reasons for the petition were not immediately clear, but the vice president has previously been accused of misusing public funds. Duterte, the daughter of controversial former President Rodrigo Duterte, says she has done nothing wrong and that efforts to oust her are only politically motivated. Indonesia has released another foreigner from death row. French national Serge Atlaoui was sentenced to death in Indonesia in 2007 for working at an ecstasy factory. Atlaoui has maintained his innocence. Indonesia handed him over to French authorities on humanitarian grounds as he has cancer. His case follows the repatriation in December of a Filipino mother and domestic helper and 5 members of an Australian drug ring. The Pacific nation of Palau wants to attract a more diverse range of tourists to its islands. And as Rick Glauert reports, it's looking to diplomatic ally Taiwan and their shared history to do so.
43-year-old Velma Obak proudly shows visitors a side of her native Palau they may not be aware of. Most tourists to this tropical island nation come for the beaches, but cultural tours like Obak's are meant to show that there's more to these small islands in the Western Pacific than white sands and coral reefs.
Usually, before, they were just interested in the water, diving and snorkeling. But when they started promoting the cultures, the culture tour, people are starting to get interested in more on a land tour, basically on the cultural tours. Because we also offers and shows them our cultures and traditions.
With a population of only 18,000 people and no major industries, Palau's economy relies on the tens of thousands of tourists who come every year, most from China. But while Palau welcomes its Chinese visitors, it's concerned about what it says is Beijing's weaponization of tourism when it wants to get the small nation in line with its policies, such as persuading Palau to stop recognizing the sovereignty of fellow island nation Taiwan, a country Beijing claims as part of its territory. Palauans feel the large number of Chinese tourists here leave them at the mercy of Chinese politics.
Because every country has good tourists. Now, the challenge is how do we weed out the bad ones? And how do we control numbers? So it's really about balancing that component and really picking and choosing the types of tourists we want, which is people who care for the environment, people who enjoy solitude, and are willing to pay a good penny to support indigenous and local tourism.
In the search for more guests like this, Palau has been taking inspiration from ally Taiwan, itself home to more than a dozen indigenous groups, and which has spent years developing indigenous tourism. It's just one area in which the two countries are growing closer, despite China's objections. And as part of a joint bid to boost tourism, they're publicly championing an ancient shared history. Here at Palau's National Museum, a new exhibit curated by Taiwan shows how the Pacific became populated over thousands of years, with migration eastwards starting from Taiwan. It highlights the cultural and linguistic similarities that still exist between Taiwan's indigenous people and Pacific Islanders. This is a treasured relationship for Taiwan, so often shunned internationally due to pressure from China. Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te chose this region for his first overseas trip since taking office, a tour which showed Taiwan as its own nation, distinct and different from China, with its own special connection to the Pacific.
I can just say that the Taiwan government or Taiwan indigenous people can use our own languages and culture as a soft power to make friends or to maintain the relations with the Pacific allied countries.
Define them, we group them into different parts of speech.
Many Palauans, like 84-year-old retired teacher Hamana Ramure, are glad about Taiwan's renewed interest in its Pacific heritage. She's finally found a partner in her decades-long effort to protect her country's language, creating a Palauan dictionary with funding and support from Taiwan.
We lose our social interaction. We sort of lose the respect that we express to the elderly or the young people with language. We lose everything. We lose the culture.
In their own different ways, both Palau and Taiwan are isolated. Hundreds of kilometers of Pacific Ocean separate Palau from its neighbors, and Taiwan is often denied space on the world stage because of China. Now, as these two island nations face up to the challenges of dealing with Beijing, they are finding common ground and a new strength in old connections. Alex Chen and Rick Lowett in Koror, Palau for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. You can visit the TaiwanPlus website or follow our social media for more stories from Taiwan and around the world. Finally, check out this orchid festival at London's Kew Gardens. The festival highlights Peru and its diverse ecosystems. I'm Betty Chen. Take care and see you next time.